the 9mm, the 9mm Parabellum, the 9 Luger, the 9x19, or simply just a 9, the semi-auto centerfire handgun caliber of our time. It's the standard. Didn't happen overnight. That cartridge is well over 100 years old. It's older than the .45 ACP. And it wasn't always very popular here in America. Why is it the standard now? Not just in America, but worldwide. How did it get there? And I think because we're there and because they are so common nowadays, people lose a bit of respect for the 9mm and they get bored with it. And for that reason, I think it's time for a little bit of 9mm appreciation. So with that, that's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life. Welcome to the podcast where we tackle this topic and, God willing, many more the right way with God Almighty at the center, biblical Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I am blessed to serve you as host. First and foremost, I am a Christian, also military, law enforcement, private security contracting, firearms instruction. If you want more on that, look at the bio bullet points in the show notes. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and fingers for battle. This cartridge comes to us from Germany, and I wanted to say 1902. I double-checked that. Wikipedia did say 1902. It was developed in 1901, adopted in 1902 per Wikipedia, to give credit where it's due. But that's well over 100 years old, and that's older than the .45 ACP. Which is kind of astounding when you think about that. Didn't come out of a vacuum, right? It was kind of a development of the .30 Luger, which is kind of a bottlenecked, but shares a lot of similarities with the 9mm. Much like in their rifle cartridges and rifle actions, the Germans were way ahead of their time on this, as we see, because it's the world standard today, well over 100 years later, well over 120 years later. But developed, put in their Luger handgun, and spread around the world. But I could do a whole probably podcast on 9mm history and adoption by different countries and all that. But for today, let's focus on how it became so popular here in America, because it wasn't always that way. It wasn't that way when I was growing up. It wasn't that way just a decade or 2 decades ago, right? For the vast majority of, the 20th century, and even getting into the 21st century, if you had looked at a policeman's hip, it would have been a .38 Special revolver. Even though, semi-auto handguns have been around for over 100 years, it may have still been a .38 Special handgun. Maybe later on a .357. Maybe it would have been a, 1911 .45, although those weren't as common in police service, but they were there. Maybe if you had a cop that was really a gun guy, they may have had like a Browning high power or something, but it was largely not 9mm. We did not adopt it in the military until the 80s. And it was I forget what year in the 80s we adopted the Beretta 92. But we stuck with the 1911 for a long, long time. And then then we had the Miami-Dade shootout. You can do your research on that. That should probably be its own episode. If I haven't already done one on that, I've been doing the podcast for a lot of years now, and I kind of lose track, if I'm being honest. But you should look into the Miami-Dade shootout. The F.B.I. Dumped a ton of rounds. There were 2 suspects. One was incapacitated pretty immediately after. The F.B.I. fired a large number of rounds and struck the dude one time with a 9mm, I guess their takeaway was that the 9mm wasn't good enough. Not the takeaway was you fired so many rounds and hit the dude once. That probably would have been my takeaway, but that's neither here nor there. They decided they want something quote-unquote better than the 9mm. And those are my quotes, not what they said. But they looked at the 10mm and decided, for whatever reason, it's not what they wanted. They developed the .40 Smith & Wesson. And for a large part of the beginning of the 21st century, the 40 Smith & Wesson, which, in my opinion, is one of the greatest tragedies on American gunfighters in the 21st century. Just an abomination of a cartridge. And there's nothing ballistically, to be fair, there's nothing ballistically wrong with the 40. If you put it in a proper handgun, like a 1911, like a, 2011, like the old STI Edge, but they're fine in that. The problem is on paper, they were like, oh, we can shove this into a 9mm sized handgun, which gives you a horrible power to weight ratio, a very snappy recoil, a very slow rate of fire compared to other options, even compared to like a 45 ACP, in my opinion. So just an abomination of a cartridge. Anyway, I think people finally had to admit, and I've told this story before, but I went to 9mm even in duty use long before it was really common, because I got into a lot of competition shooting, and I quickly realized that I don't care what people say, because the common trope of the day was nobody carries 9, it's ridiculous, you might as well, I don't know, just, blow a spitball at them out of a straw, because 9mm just bounces off people. That was kind of the common, lure of the day, was that 9mm was ridiculous, nobody, that respected themselves would carry a 9mm. I was issued a 40 when I carried a 9 in the war. Never let me down there, the Beretta or the cartridge. But I carried other things too. That wasn't my primary weapon. But when I went to work for L.A.P.D, it was 40, and everybody knew it had to be a 40 or a 45. Right? That was like everybody tells me it has to be a 40 or a 45. Like everybody knows. And I started hard into competition shooting with a 45. I started out with. Because I was like, 45's got to be better. I was a big caliber warrior back in the day. And I actually started shooting competition and realizing even though I was a decent shot for a cop, I wasn't a very decent shot compared to how good you can actually shoot. And I humbled myself and started going back to competitions and getting better. And shooting on the clock, which a lot of people that like other calibers, I don't think they actually shoot with a shot timer. They just, in their head, they think they're fast. But you have to test that with data, right? But shooting with a shot timer, I quickly realized that I could get way more rounds on target. And I forget because it's been a lot of years since I did this experiment. But, shooting at, let's say, like a USPSA A-zone at a certain yardage, I could get way more, not like one more, like way more rounds on target in, let's say, 2 seconds, which is a classic, bill drill. I could get way more rounds on target with 9 than 40 or whatever. And you couldn't tell me, despite what everybody else was saying, like, just looking at the numbers, there's no way you can tell me it's not more effective. So why am I going to carry something less effective at work just because everybody knows that, it doesn't work? The math didn't bear that out. And if you looked at actual statistics, it didn't bear that out that 9mm didn't work. It was just like I don't want to use any super disparaging terms, but it was what everybody knew that just wasn't true. So I switched to 9 back when very few people that was not the thing to carry when I started carrying 9. And then I feel kind of vindicated on this because just you can only lie about math for so long before people start to actually realize it. And a lot of people started to realize it before the F.B.I, but the very same F.B.I that wanted something different than 9mm all those years ago started looking at it again and went, oh, actually, 9mm is awesome. And they didn't say it was awesome, right? But they had this big study. You can look at it. It's not been that long ago, actually, of when they went back to 9mm. And you should, hopefully if you listen to this podcast, you trust me. But trust but verify. Go look up that study for yourself. And things I remember from reading that study were things that, like, pretty much if you were an avid shooter, you knew. Less recoil, people's scores improved, they shot better, and the cost of ammunition was less. And if you look at the real world data from shootings and things like that, and this is a big thing I'm going to come back to, with modern expanding ammunition, there really is no statistical difference There's really no difference in the effectiveness of 9 versus 40 versus 45. Yeah, I know, I said it, right? And there really isn't. So why would you pay more to train more or have less training if you have a certain budget, which, even federal agencies have budgets, right? If you have X amount of money for ammo, it's better to train more, because what actually matters is getting a bullet where you need it to go. And part of that with handguns is training. Handguns are a very perishable skill. You have to stay on top of that. And it just makes sense, right? Like, I figured that out a while ago. The FBI certainly figured it out begrudgingly and, several decades behind. But they begrudgingly admitted, I don't know about begrudgingly, but they admitted that 9mm kind of made more sense. And I concur, right? It does make more sense. And, for better or worse, when the FBI does something, a lot of other agencies and a lot of other people take note and go, oh, I guess, carrying a 9mm won't get you killed in the streets. I guess it actually does work. I guess it doesn't actually bounce off people's chests or whatever. And that started a big swing in 9mm. And again, it's not that long ago. We're not talking that long ago. 9mm certainly were around then. 9mm have certainly been around a long time, and you could find them, but they weren't like the standard. Now they are in a big way the standard here in America. Why is that? I believe they're the best balance of available cartridges. Now, I want to go ahead and say that you certainly probably could today, 120 years later, more than that, design a ballistically better cartridge or maybe better cartridge in a couple of different ways. But the Germans were way ahead of their time. However, you would have a giant hurdle to get enough industry support, enough guns made in it, enough ammo made in it to come close to rivaling the price of 9mm. One of the things of 9mm is that it is very affordable. One of the reasons it's affordable is because there's a lot, not just us, but a lot of other countries that make it. Supply and demand, right? And industry support and guns chambered in it. You can see an example of this in .30 Super Carry. You could, I don't know that I agree with this, but you could make a case that .30 Super Carry it would be a better cartridge than 9mm today, with the better powders, better bullet design and stuff like that. But .30 Super Carry, although it's a very new cartridge, is almost entirely dead in the water. Why? Because it costs more. Like go buy 1,000 rounds of that versus 1,000 rounds of 9mm. And it's not that much better. So it has to be so much better that the entire industry kind of switches to it. If we look at this from the rifle world, are there way better ballistically, advantageous cartridges than the .308? Yeah, there are a lot. I could probably name a dozen off the top of my head for different situations. But they're not that much better that for the average person, the average deer hunter, the average, person into survival and guns and stuff like that, preppers, that there's not enough ballistic advantage that it doesn't make more sense to just go with the .308 because it's widely available and affordable in ammunition and guns and firearms that fire it, right? So that's getting back to, you could say the same thing about 12 gauge, but getting back to the 9mm, it is widely available. It is very affordable, right? The most affordable centerfire handgun cartridge, unless you just find some crazy sale on some weird thing. Right, somebody's just trying to jettison all their 40 Smith & Wesson ammo because they realize it's an abomination. Right, you could find an exception, but in general, it's the most affordable center fire handgun round. And that lets you practice more. And that is a giant factor. The most important factor is training. Also, I believe it's got a very, I shouldn't say best because you could, again, probably design a better cartridge, but of the common cartridges, it has the best balance of recoil and shootability. In a full-size fighting handgun, right? You put in a little hashtag #MeToo pocket gun, not so much. But in a full-size fighting handgun, Beretta 92, a SIG 226, a Glock if you're going to slum it, and carry a plastic striker fire gun. But it's got the best balance of shootability. It's got controllable recoil. And getting back to, it is effective, especially with modern hollow point bullets. expanding bullets. They've come a long way. And to give the FBI, a little bit of leeway here, when they were looking at these cartridges, a while ago, decades ago, hollow point ammunition was kind of in its infancy, right? As far as handgun ammunition went, there was like Supervel and that was an early one, but there wasn't all this broad testing. There wasn't all this ballistics gel testing, to figure out what hollow point designs work and what doesn't. Just because something has a hollow point, you can go find some really cheap hollow points that likely won't expand at all or will overexpand, giving you less penetration, right? If you go with cheap hollow points, just because something has a hollow point in it doesn't mean it's going to work well. It took time to figure that science out, to figure that balance out between expansion and penetration. But once that was nailed down, the 9mm, in my opinion, is a very good balance of shootability and effectiveness. And I don't care what handgun round it is, of common handgun rounds, 940, 45, 357 SIG, 10mm, handguns are inherently ineffective, like compared to shotguns and rifles. You have them because you can have them on you, not because they're super effective fighting tools. And this is coming from somebody that loves handguns. It's won more handgun competitions than any other competitions. I love the handgun. I love them mostly because they're challenging. But that being said, none of those are very good. You are likely going to need, if you look at the numbers and statistics, not just what you emotionally want to be true and emote all over your keyboard or your screen on your phone to leave a comment. If you look at actual data, it doesn't really matter what the cartridge is. You're likely going to need several rounds of handgun to stop somebody. And the faster you can get those in the target, the better. And again, the best balance. So you can get those in quicker. You can stop that threat quicker. If you're talking about what I'm going to call a mechanical stop, right? You could pull out a handgun that doesn't even fire. It doesn't even have a firing pin and point it at somebody and they put their hands up and surrender. And that would be fantastic, right? Because the whole point of you using your gun is to stop that person from doing the behavior that caused you to have to shoot them in the first place. So obviously in that case, caliber doesn't matter. Ammunition doesn't matter. The gun being loaded doesn't matter. But you don't count on that. Also, you could shoot somebody one time, it hit them in the pinky, and they decide, oh, you're serious. They're going to take their ball and go home. In which case, again, fine. But in the actual cases where you have to break somebody down physically to stop them from doing that bad behavior to cause you to start shooting them in the first place, you are likely going to need several rounds. And the cartridge that's widely available that lets you get those rounds in quick is a 9mm. It's the best balance. And going back to, good, proven, modern expanding ammunition, it's effective. Spear Gold Dots, Winchester Ranger T, Remington, I'm going to say Golden Bullet, that's a 22, Remington Golden Saber or Black Belt, Hornady Critical Duty, Federal HST, if I didn't say that one already. Right? There's really good proven loads that have pretty much struck that balance of penetration and expansion. And there's been enough use of the 9mm and the other calibers to kind of back that up, that there's statistically no difference in the effectiveness of 940 and 45. It'd be a rounding error if there was a difference at all. You could say something like a 5.7 would have less recoil, but here's the thing, 5.7, there's probably somebody out there that carries a 5.7 EDC, but there have not been really any major agencies or big agencies, or it hasn't been used in any real significant number other than for plinking and having fun. Even the military didn't end up adopting it like the initial plans were. I'm sure some specialized units use it, but there has not been enough real-world data to show that is effective as far as actual street shootings and things like that go, like there has been with the other, mainstream pistol calibers. So it's got the data to back it up. We have the bullet technology nowadays. We have that system pretty well worked out. And it's not that the other cartridges don't work. It's not what I'm saying. Of course they work. But for the vast majority of cases that you would use a handgun for, the things that you want a handgun for, when you get the emotions out of it and look logically at the choices, including price, not just like on paper, but like what you're going to pay for the ammunition, when you actually shoot with a shot timer, not just what you want to be true, but when you look at actual numbers, when you do all that, for most people, most of the time, the 9mm is the most logical choice. Again, it's not saying that the other cartridges don't work, but the most logical choice, I think, in most cases is the 9mm, which is why it is, going back to the starting point, I forget what I said, de facto, but it's the go-to centerfire handgun cartridge, period. It's kind of amazing. No other cartridge, I think, has achieved what the 9mm has achieved. In that, think about this. It's not just us that use it. The Russians use it. The Chinese use it. Europe uses it. Obviously, it came from Europe. Germany uses it. You'd be hard-pressed to find a country that doesn't use it. That would have been like us adopting 7.62x39, or the Russians adopting 5.56, or, China adopting one of our, the 45 ACP or something in a large scale. Like, it's so good that it's hard to argue with. It's not just a standard for us, it's a standard worldwide. It's not always the case. You could find an exception, but, if you randomly went to 100 countries around the world and looked at military and law enforcement and what they were carrying for handguns, the vast majority is going to be 9mm. But again, no other round has really achieved that. That's pretty astounding. So maybe a little bit of appreciation for the 9mm. Anyway, with that, I thought it was worth talking about. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate all that you do. Your tactical tip of the day: firing pin channels. There are people that lubricate their guns in different ways. Some people don't like to lubricate their guns at all, if you can imagine that. Some like to really just douse everything in lube so it's dripping. You do you. But my advice is, when it comes to firing pin channels, no to very, very little lubrication in the firing pin channel on a martial gun, on a fighting gun, even on a hunting gun, but especially on a fighting gun. Why? Because that can impede the movement of the firing pin back and forth. It could gum up. If you don't use the right lube in extreme temperatures, that could be a problem. It also can attract dirt and grime and, carbon fouling, the fouling that comes from primers, all that stuff in the firing pin channel. Some guns' firing pin channels are easier to clean than others, but don't over lubricate that firing pin channel. You probably don't need to put a bunch of lubrication in there anyway. And two, it's, in my opinion, more likely to give you an issue than solve a problem. So you could spray lube all over the outside of your gun if you want, but when it comes to the inside of the firing pin channel, just be mindful of that. Your tactical verse of the day. Well, I'm having a hard time deciding between two, so you're going to get two for today. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. And then, the blessings of the Lord make one rich, and he adds no sorrow with it. With that, guys, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.